Clayton Collier here explaining my AP Top 25 ballot for Week 11. Now, half of my top 10 from last week lost games, so some shuffling going on in my ballot, but not at the top. Number 1, Auburn, not only in my ballot, but in the AP Top 25 poll for the first time in school history. Now, they should have been last week, but a couple voters voted them outside of the top 2. But the Tigers took down Kentucky, got the job done, and they are now the undisputed number 1, garnering 45 of the 61 first place votes this week. They've won 15 straight, 18-1 on the season. Hard to argue with Auburn at number 1. Gonzaga also putting up a good fight this week. A win over San Francisco. Not an easy win. Them checking in at number 2. Baylor bounce back week, 2-0 week for them. 2 road victories at West Virginia and Oklahoma. I checked them in at number 3. Arizona number 4. 6-0 in the Pac-12 right now with wins at Stanford and at Cal this week. A combined margin of victory of 53 points. Dominant for the Cats. They're in at number 4 in my ballot. Number 5, Kansas survives Kansas State 78-75. Huge week ahead. Texas Tech tonight, Kentucky on Saturday in the Big 12 SEC Challenge. Now, speaking of Texas Tech, they come in at number 10 in my poll here. The Red Raiders added another top 25 win, defeating Iowa State. Now a series split. They also beat West Virginia. Tech is now 5-2 in a brutally tough Big 12 this year. They already have wins over Kansas and Baylor already in conference play. Michigan State up to 6 in my poll after a win over Wisconsin, who drops to number 9 from number 3 in my ballot from last week. Now, the Badgers didn't have Tyler Wall in that game, so I went easy on them, dropping them just the 6 spots down to number 9 overall. Houston, doesn't matter who they do not have. No Marcus Sasser, no Tremont Mark, a host of other injuries. 9 straight wins for them, undefeated in the American. Houston in at number 7 for me, and Purdue taking barely surviving Illinois in double overtime, then fell to Indiana. They dropped to 8 in my ballot this week. Number 11, Kentucky. Didn't have Ty Washington for most of Saturday's loss to Auburn. They moved up 1 mostly because of some of the other teams we're going to talk about falling, so not as much an accomplishment as just moving up after several teams suffered losses as well for them. As you see, UCLA at 12. Duke, one of those teams that fell. They had an overtime loss to Florida State, their second unranked loss in a weak ACC so far this season. Villanova also a home loss to Marquette. We'll talk about them in just a minute, but Villanova now 7-5 against Quad 1 and Quad 2. I checked them in at 14. And finally, Ohio State at 15. They beat IUPUI, but they rise to 15, kind of like Kentucky, more getting the benefit of the doubt of other teams losing, so they move up 2 spots in my poll to 15. Checking in at 16, Providence. They're back from their COVID-19 pause. They got wins over Georgetown and Butler, now 6-1 in the Big East, which is not easy to do. Number 17, USC, 2 road wins at Colorado and Utah, jumping 1 spot in my ballot to 17. Number 18, LSU. They've now lost 3 straight, but I went easy on them because they haven't had Xavier Pinson, their starting point guard. I had them at 9th last week, so I dropped them to 18th overall in my poll with now losers of 3 straight. Hey, how about UConn? 2 blowout wins over Butler. They also own a win over Marquette, which is looking better and better and better now because Marquette checking in on my ballot at number 20. They've beat, this past week, they beat Nova, they beat Xavier. They've now won 6 straight and are 6-4 in Quad 1 games. Number 21, Davidson. I debuted them on my ballot last week. They picked up a Quad 1 win at VCU. The Cats now have won 15 in a row, 16-2 on the season. And hey, how about the Vols back in my ballot now after beating LSU? Tough week ahead for the Vols, now hosting Florida, then going out to play Texas in Austin as part of that Big 12 SEC Challenge. BYU staying put at 23 in my ballot after a 2-0 week. Xavier hanging in at 24 after the loss to Marquette. Again, a very tough Big East conference that we're seeing here, and we have 5 teams in my top 25 to reflect that. And checking in at number 25, John Morant's alma mater, Murray State. They are now 17-2 on the season, winners of 7 straight. One of their 2 losses came at Auburn. Now, 3 teams dropped off of my ballot this week. That was Iowa State, Illinois, and Loyola Chicago, all taking losses. Ramblers lost to Missouri State. The Cyclones now just 2-5 in Big 12 play. Granted, they have had a brutal start to conference play with very difficult opponents starting off. And then the Fighting Illini, they took that double overtime loss to Purdue, then didn't have Kofi Cockburn in the loss to Maryland as well. All 3 are still right on the cusp for me, but just outside of my top 25 this week. Have a comment? Let me know on Twitter at Clayton J. Collier. I'll be back next week with my ballot explainer.